The air in our sprawling suburban home in California always felt thick with expectation, especially when it came to my sister Clara. She was the golden child, the sun around which our entire family orbited. Her laughter, her achievements, her very existence seemed to cast a long, cold shadow over me, Alara. I was merely the moon, reflecting a meager light, forever secondary. Today was her 18th birthday, a milestone that for Clara felt more like a coronation. The house buzzed with relatives, their voices a cacophony of praise and well wishes, all directed at her. I stood in the periphery, a silent observer, my smile a brittle facade. Every "happy birthday, Clara" felt like a subtle jab, a reminder of my own perceived inadequacies. My mother, a woman who doted on Clara with an almost religious fervor, had outdone herself. The living room was draped in pastel banners, balloons bobbed at the ceiling, and a table groaned under the weight of an elaborate feast. But the centerpiece, the true monument to Clara's perfection, was the cake. It sat majestically on the dining table, a three-tiered spectacle of white frosting, delicate sugar flowers, and a shimmering 18-topper. It was everything Clara was, grand, beautiful, and utterly flawless, and it was everything I wasn't. A bitter taste filled my mouth as I watched her preen, accepting compliments with a grace that only fueled my simmering resentment. She wore a new dress, a soft blue that complemented her eyes, making her look even more angelic. I, on the other hand, had chosen a simple black dress, hoping to disappear into the background, yet still feeling scrutinized. The hours dragged on, each minute an agonizing testament to Clara's popularity and charm. Relatives, even those I barely knew, lined up to hug her, showering her with gifts and effusive praise. My father, usually a man of few words, beamed with an almost paternal pride, his arm around Clara's shoulder. He barely noticed me, standing alone by the window, fiddling with a loose thread on my dress. I could hear snippets of conversation. Clara is going to achieve great things. Such a talented young woman, a true joy to be around. Each word chipped away at my composure, eroding the thin veneer of civility I had managed to maintain. The injustice of it all gnawed at me. Hadn't I also worked hard? Hadn't I also achieved things? Why was it always her? Why was I always destined to be less? As the evening progressed, the air grew thick with anticipation for the cake cutting. My mother, with a flourish, announced that it was time. Everyone gathered around the dining table, cell phones at the ready to capture the moment. Clara, blushing prettily, stood beside the colossal confection, her hands clasped in front of her. The lights dimmed, and the happy birthday song began, a harmonious chorus that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I watched my mother approach the cake, a huge knife in her hand, her eyes sparkling with pride. A sudden, irrational rage surged through me, a powerful, uncontrollable wave that threatened to consume me whole. The cake, in that moment, wasn't just a dessert. It was a symbol of everything I hated, everything I envied, everything that kept me in Clara's shadow. As the final notes of the song faded, a primal instinct took over. Before anyone could react, before my mother could even make the first cut, I lunged forward. My hands, trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation, slammed down onto the pristine white frosting. The delicate sugar flowers crumbled, the layers gave way, and the shimmering 18-topper toppled ignominiously into the collapsing mess. A collective gasp echoed through the room, followed by an immediate stunned silence. The lights flickered back on, illuminating the wreckage and my own defiant, tear-streaked face. In that instant, all eyes were on me, but not with praise, not with admiration, but with a horrifying mixture of shock, disgust, and disbelief. Please subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. The silence that followed my outburst was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. It felt colder than any winter chill, thicker than any fog. The initial shock on everyone's faces slowly morphed into something more defined. My father's jaw was clenched, his eyes filled with a pained disappointment I had never seen before. My mother's face was a mask of pure horror, her hand still holding the cake knife, now dangling uselessly at her side. Clara, the birthday girl, stood utterly still, her blue eyes wide, a single tear tracing a path through the powdered sugar and frosting that had splattered onto her face. It was in that moment, seeing her vulnerability, that a sliver of regret pierced the wall of my rage, but it was quickly shoved aside by a fierce, defensive pride. The first to break the silence was my father. His voice was low, controlled, but laced with a quiet fury. "Ilara, what in the world have you done?" he asked, his question a statement of profound disappointment. I couldn't answer. The words were trapped in my throat, replaced by a stinging heat behind my eyes. I just stood there, my hands still messy with frosting and cake crumbs, a monument to my own destruction. The guests, sensing the profound discomfort, began to whisper amongst themselves, their hushed tones a new kind of judgment. Some started to gather their things, mumbling hurried goodbyes to my parents. The party was over, a beautiful celebration reduced to a messy, bitter end. My mother, finally regaining her composure, turned to Clara, her hands reaching out to comfort her. "Oh, my sweet girl," she murmured. "I am so sorry." She ignored me completely, as if I were a ghost, a non-entity. This was the moment I had always feared, the moment my invisibility became a weapon wielded against me. Clara, still silent, just shook her head, her gaze fixed on the ruined cake. It wasn't the loss of the dessert that hurt her. It was the public, humiliating act of my betrayal. I had not just ruined a cake. I had shattered a moment, a memory, and a symbol of her joy. The final few guests left quickly, leaving only our immediate family to face the aftermath. The next few minutes were a blur of hushed accusations and bitter tears. My father led me away from the wreckage, his grip firm on my arm. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. That was worse. His quiet disappointment felt like 1,000 shouted curses. He simply pointed me toward my room and told me to stay there until he was ready to talk. I fled, the shame burning a trail behind me. In my room, I slammed the door shut, collapsing onto my bed, the physical exhaustion of the day finally catching up to me. The anger that had fueled my actions was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I looked at my hands, still sticky and stained. They felt foreign, as if they belonged to someone else, someone I didn't recognize, someone who was capable of such a cruel and senseless act. The knock on my door was soft, but firm. It was my father. The hours had passed in a miserable haze since I had been banished to my room. The sun had set, and the quiet of the night was broken only by the distant hum of crickets. I didn't answer, but the door opened anyway. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. He didn't come in, just leaned against the doorframe, his hands in his pockets. The disappointment I had seen on his face earlier was still there, but it was now mixed with a weary sadness. "We need to talk, Ilara," he said, his voice flat. I didn't respond, just turned my head away, staring at the wall. He walked to the edge of my bed and sat down. The springs groaned under his weight. "I'm not going to yell," he began. "Yelling won't change what happened, but I need to understand. Why?" His voice cracked on the last word. I finally looked at him, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. How could I explain? How could I articulate the years of feeling second best, of living in Clara's shadow? The words felt cheap and selfish now, especially in light of the destruction I had caused. I just shook my head, unable to speak. He sighed, a long, weary sound that made my heart ache. "Do you have any idea how much that meant to her?" he continued, his voice softening slightly. "That cake, the party, it was all to celebrate her, to celebrate everything she's accomplished. And you just destroyed it." He gestured vaguely with his hand, as if replaying the scene in his mind. "We've always tried to give you both everything you need. We've supported your choices, your interests. Why do you feel the need to do something like this? Is it because of Clara?" The question hung in the air between us. It was an accusation and a plea all at once. I finally found my voice, a whisper so small I wasn't sure he could hear it. "You don't get it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You never see me. It's always Clara. Always. Everything is for her. The praise, the attention. I'm just here." The last sentence came out as a desperate, frustrated cry. My father was silent for a long moment, processing my words. He looked at the floor, then back at me, his face a mix of surprise and confusion. "Ilara, that's not true," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We love you both equally." But even as he said the words, they felt hollow. He stood up, the chair groaning in protest. "We'll talk more in the morning," he said, his voice now distant. "I need some time to think." He left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I was left alone with my thoughts, the sticky residue on my hands a constant, humiliating reminder of my actions. The next morning, the house was a morgue. The remnants of the party had been cleaned away, but the tension was palpable, a heavy fog that clung to every room. My mother didn't speak to me. She moved through the house with a rigid efficiency, her back straight, her face an unreadable mask. When she saw me, her gaze would slide right past me as if I were a piece of furniture. My father, true to his word, tried to talk to me, but his attempts felt strained and awkward. He would start a sentence, then trail off, unsure of what to say. His attempts at conversation were a painful reminder of the chasm I had created. Clara, my sister, was nowhere to be seen. I knew she was in her room, and I could hear the faint sound of music coming from under her door. It was the music she always listened to when she was sad or upset. The thought of her in there, hurting because of me, made my stomach twist with a strange mix of guilt and stubborn pride. I wanted to apologize, to explain, but my pride wouldn't allow it. It felt like admitting defeat, like confirming all their suspicions that I was the villain, the cruel, jealous sister they now saw me as. My attempts to make breakfast, a peace offering of scrambled eggs, were met with silent rejection. My mother simply grabbed a bowl of cereal and ate it in the corner of the kitchen, her back to me. My father, who usually loved my cooking, mumbled something about not being hungry and left for work. I was alone in the kitchen, staring at the pan of uneaten eggs, the steam rising like a sad little cloud. The silence was louder than any argument. It was a complete and total emotional isolation. Later that afternoon, I decided to go for a walk, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house. The weather was gray and overcast, a perfect reflection of my mood. I walked aimlessly through the quiet suburban streets, the neatly manicured lawns and smiling families I passed a painful contrast to the chaos I'd left behind. I realized then that my moment of catharsis, my act of rebellion, had not been a victory. It hadn't made me feel better. It had only solidified my position as the outcast, the one who was truly alone. I had sought to destroy Clara's happiness, but in doing so, I had only succeeded in destroying what little peace and connection I had in my own life. Please subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. A few days of this excruciating silence passed. The emotional distance was unbearable. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner where no one spoke, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked to Clara's room and knocked on her door, my heart pounding in my chest. There was a pause, and then the sound of the lock clicking. The door opened just a crack, and Clara's face appeared in the gap. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. Her expression was guarded, a wall I had built with my own hands. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She hesitated, her eyes flickering from my face to the floor. "About what, Ilara?" she finally said, her voice a flat, emotionless tone I had never heard from her before. It was that more than anything that broke through my stubbornness. The girl who was always so full of light now sounded empty. "About everything," I said, pushing the door open a little more. She stepped back, allowing me to enter. Her room was a sanctuary, a cozy space filled with books, art supplies, and posters of her favorite bands. It felt so different from my own sterile, empty room. I sat on the edge of her bed, and she sat in a chair across from me, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words, and hurt. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue, "for what I did to your cake, and to your party." She didn't respond, just watched me, her expression unchanging. I know it was a horrible thing to do, and I know it was cruel. I was finally being honest with myself, and with her. The words, once so difficult to say, now came out in a torrent. I was just so jealous of everything. The way Mom and Dad look at you, the way everyone always praises you. I felt like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. The confession, once so shameful, now felt like a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. Clara finally uncrossed her arms, A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I know," she said quietly. "I've always known." I stared at her, stunned. "I've always felt it," she continued. "The tension. The way you would always pull away when people complimented me. I just didn't know what to do about it. It's not a competition, Alara. I've never seen it as one." Her words were a painful truth. I had spent so long creating this narrative of rivalry in my head that I had failed to see that Clara was just living her life, not trying to outshine me. The realization was devastating. My confession to Clara didn't magically fix everything, but it was a start. It cracked the wall of silence that had separated us. The next day, things were still tense, but there was a subtle shift. My mother, though still reserved, offered me a plate of food at dinner instead of letting me serve myself. My father asked me a question about my classes, and for the first time in days, the conversation felt less like a forced interaction and more like a tentative connection. The emotional frost was slowly beginning to thaw. The real change, however, came from Clara. She started leaving small notes on my door. One day it was a drawing of a cat, the next a list of funny memes. They were simple, almost silly gestures, but they were her way of reaching out, of showing me that she was willing to try and rebuild what I had broken. Her kindness was both a comfort and a deep source of shame. She was being the bigger person, and I was the one who had so selfishly caused her pain. A week after the incident, she knocked on my door. When I opened it, she was holding 2 bowls of ice cream. "I figured we could start over," she said, a small, genuine smile on her face, with something that can't be destroyed. I looked at her kind eyes, and felt a rush of emotion that was no longer anger, but a profound sadness for all the wasted years. We sat on my bed, eating ice cream in comfortable silence. We didn't talk about the past, not yet. We talked about school, about our friends, about our plans for the future. For the first time, our conversation felt like a genuine exchange, not a forced performance. Later that evening, my mother came to my room. She sat on the floor beside my bed, a look of vulnerability on her face that I had never seen before. "Your sister, she told me about what you said," she began, her voice low. "About feeling invisible." She paused, her eyes meeting mine. I'm so sorry, Alara. We never meant for you to feel that way. We were so proud of Clara's achievements that maybe we didn't show you enough that we were just as proud of you. That's no excuse, but I hope you can forgive us." The admission was raw and honest, and it was the first time I felt that my parents were not just my parents, but fallible, complex people who had made a mistake. The process of healing was slow and difficult. The easy silence and unspoken resentments of years don't just disappear overnight. I started talking to a therapist, a recommendation from my parents. It was in those sessions that I began to truly unpack the deep-seated jealousy and the unhealthy comparison I had been making with Clara my entire life. I learned to recognize my own achievements, my own worth, instead of constantly measuring myself against her. It was a difficult but necessary journey, and it was only possible because my family was willing to meet me halfway. I made a concerted effort to be a better sister, a better daughter. I would go out of my way to ask Clara about her day, to genuinely listen to her without the undercurrent of resentment. I offered to help her with her college applications, even though the thought of her success still stirred a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The difference now was that I had the tools to deal with those feelings, to acknowledge them without acting on them. The conversations with my parents became more honest, more open. We talked about their expectations, about my feelings, and we began to build a new foundation of trust and understanding. My relationship with my mother saw the most dramatic change. She started taking me out for coffee, just the 2 of us. We would talk about things we had never talked about before, her dreams, her fears, her life before she was a mother. I saw her not just as the woman who always put Clara first, but as a person with her own history and struggles. It was in one of these conversations that she told me about a difficult period in her life, a time when she felt unseen and undervalued. Her story helped me see that the love she showered on Clara was perhaps a way of overcompensating, a way of ensuring that her child never felt the way she had felt. It didn't excuse her actions, but it gave me a deeper understanding of the person behind them. The scar from the cake incident remained, a powerful and visible reminder of my low point, but it was no longer a source of shame. It became a symbol of a crisis, a necessary breaking point that had forced us all to confront the truth. The love was always there, underneath the layers of resentment and neglect, but it took a drastic act of destruction to finally uncover it. I was no longer the villain of my own story. I was now the protagonist on a difficult but hopeful journey to redemption. I still had a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like I was walking on my own 2 feet, not in anyone's shadow. Please subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. The holiday season that year was a stark contrast to Clara's birthday. There was no grand, perfect display, no forced cheer. Instead, there was an authentic warmth that had been missing for years. My parents didn't overdo the decorations. Clara and I worked together to make Christmas cookies, laughing as we tried to frost them without making a mess. The scent of cinnamon and sugar filled the air, a scent that felt more like home than anything I could remember. Our conversations were no longer stilted. They flowed naturally, with an ease that felt both new and long overdue. One afternoon, I found a photo album on the coffee table. It was one of the old-fashioned ones with thick, sticky pages. I flipped through it, and my eyes fell on a picture of me, maybe 7 years old, holding up a drawing of a lopsided house. I didn't remember the picture being taken, but my mother's handwritten note below it read, "Ilara's first masterpiece." My throat tightened. I had always believed that my mother only celebrated Clara's artistic talents, but here was proof that she had seen me too, that she had celebrated my small, clumsy steps. The photo wasn't for public display. It was a private memory, a small kindness that I had been blind to in my bitterness. My relationship with Clara had blossomed into something beautiful and real. We were no longer just sisters. We were friends. We went shopping together, we got late-night fast food, and we would stay up late talking about boys, jobs, and our dreams for the future. We had a bond that was forged not out of shared perfection, but out of shared vulnerability. She would confess her anxieties about college, her fears of not being good enough, and I would confess my own struggles with my self-worth. We were 2 imperfect people, supporting each other through our respective journeys. The change wasn't just internal. My father, who had always been so stoic, started to open up more. He would tell me stories about his childhood, about his own struggles with feeling like he didn't measure up. He would ask for my advice, not just on small things, but on important decisions. The respect and love in his eyes were no longer clouded by disappointment. They were clear and present, and I finally felt like I was seen, not just for my mistakes, but for who I was. The family that had once felt so broken was slowly and painstakingly being put back together, with each of us playing a vital role in its reconstruction. My journey to personal growth and redemption wasn't without its challenges. The consequences of my actions still lingered. Friends who had been at the party and witnessed my outburst kept their distance. The initial shock and gossip had died down, but the memory of it hadn't. I had to learn to live with the fact that my moment of rage had created a lasting impression, a public record of my worst self. I lost some friends, and others were hesitant to get close, wary of the unpredictable girl who had smashed her sister's birthday cake. This was perhaps the most humbling part of my journey. I couldn't just apologize and have everything return to normal. I had to earn back trust, not just from my family, but from the wider world. This meant facing the awkward silences, the hesitant glances, and the subtle shifts in conversation when I entered a room. I realized that true redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about living in the present in a way that proved I had changed. It meant being a better friend, a more reliable person, and someone who could be trusted. I had to start small. I volunteered at a local community center, helping with after-school programs. It was there, working with children, that I began to see a different side of myself. I was patient, kind, and genuinely invested in their well-being. It was in helping others that I began to build a new identity, one not defined by my past mistakes, but by my present actions. One day, a friend from the party, Sarah, who had been distant, saw me at the community center. We made small talk, and I could see her observing me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a step. I also had to face the internal consequences. The jealousy, while no longer controlling my life, would still rear its ugly head from time to time. A good grade of Clara's, a compliment directed her way, and I would feel a familiar pang of envy. The difference was that I could now recognize it for what it was, an old, unhealthy habit, and I could choose a different path. Instead of retreating into bitterness, I would go to Clara and genuinely congratulate her. The smile she would give me in return was the best reward. It was a new kind of victory, one that came from within, and it was worth more than 1,000 cakes. 2 years after Clara's disastrous 18th birthday, we stood in the kitchen, making plans for her college move. She was going to a university on the East Coast, a dream she had worked so hard to achieve. The air was filled with a mix of excitement and bittersweet sadness. My mother bustled around, packing boxes, her face a mix of pride and worry. My father was on the phone, arranging for the moving truck. It was a chaotic, beautiful family moment, and I was a part of it, fully and completely. Clara and I were standing at the kitchen counter, going over her packing list. We were laughing at a memory of a ridiculous fight we'd had a long time ago. Suddenly, Clara's eyes fell on the spot where the cake had sat that night. She paused, and for a moment, the laughter died down. I followed her gaze, and a lump formed in my throat. The memory was no longer a source of pain, but a quiet, powerful reminder of how far we had all come. Clara looked at me, her eyes soft with affection. "You know," she said, her voice low. "That night, it was probably the worst night of my life, but I think maybe it was the most important one." I nodded, understanding completely. It was a moment of destruction that had led to a rebuilding, a shared trauma that had created a deeper bond. We were not perfect, and our family was not a flawless, picture-perfect image. We were real, messy, and deeply flawed, and in our shared vulnerability, we had found a new kind of strength. The day came for Clara to leave. We all stood on the front lawn, watching as the moving truck pulled away. We hugged her goodbye, my father, my mother, and me, a true family huddle. As she got into her car, she turned and looked at me. "I love you, Alara," she said, a genuine, loving smile on her face. "I'll see you soon." I smiled back, tears in my eyes. The words were simple, but they meant everything. I had spent so long trying to tear something down, and in the end, I had helped build something far more beautiful and resilient in its place. I had lost the battle for perfection, but I had won the war for my soul. Please subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories.